I'm just going to
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you for coming to this discussion, an open discussion where we make a space for as many voices as we can accommodate to what is a conversation about necessary changes to the Domestic Violence Act, 10 recommendations for ending violence against women. I am Sue Ann Barrett of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, and as usual, I'm really pleased to be here in this collaboration with the Equal Opportunities Commission. It is my pleasure, of course, to chair and take you through the discussion, as well as to welcome specially, and as more people come in, we recognize your presence, the representative of the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, Solange D'Souza Ransom. Office of the PM representative, the Law Reform Commission rep, Mrs. Paula Ann Cross Horton, Chief Parliamentary Counsel, Megan Doyle, U.S. Embassy representative, judiciary representatives, international agencies, member of civil society organizations, and more. We really do appreciate all of we appreciate your attendance and your time on this Friday morning. Without further ado, tomorrow marks the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, the first of 16 days of activism that times the period between this day, tomorrow, and Human Rights Day on December 10th. In between, we have World AIDS Day on December 1st, and before that, International Women Human Rights Defenders Day on November 29th. So for all of you who have committed your lives to this work, this endeavor, you know you have a busy November into December. Santa Claus will bless you especially this year. We come together to discuss some of the issues that emerge in terms of achieving further protection for victims and higher efficiency in enforcement. At the end of today, we hope our tangible will be a letter to be taken to the Attorney General for signing. And Dr. Hossain, who comes up next, will elaborate on that tangible, and after our discussion, we will talk further on that effort and further activities for this 16 days of activism. Dr. Hossain, who is currently a lecturer and the head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus, has been involved in Caribbean feminist movement building for 2 decades. She is a researcher and focuses on areas such as politics and governance, Caribbean feminisms, Indo-Caribbean feminist theorizing, and sexualities. Dr. Hossain also writes a weekly column, Diary of a Mothering Worker, for the Trinidad Guardian. It is my pleasure to welcome her to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to have you here with us today. I want to welcome you all to this event of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies as we officially begin to kick off our work for 16 days of activism to end gender-based violence. I do want to just give brief background on the Institute, which is to say that 2018 will be our 25th year as a research, teaching, and outreach institute. And so this comes as part of a long history of engagement with issues of gender-based violence. And we hope it's one of the ways that we continue to contribute to this issue and to organizing around it and around solutions, and also continue to grow. So any feedback that you have from us that we could take into our future work would be welcome. I want to especially welcome members of the women's movement today. Always pleasure to see you. And just a couple organizations that I recognize: National Muslim Women's Association Organization, WINAD, AFET, CAFRA, Working Women, Women's Speak Project, RED Initiatives, the network of NGOs of Trinidad and Tobago for the Advancement of Women. I also recognize Office of Prime Minister Gender and Child Affairs Division representatives and members of United Nations organizations, and the Seroptimist of Trinidad and Tobago. So UB colleagues, media, specially invited guests, welcome. This event is part of a series of activities, and I'm just going to list them for you briefly so that you understand that we are trying to tackle the issue of gender injustice and indeed gender-based violence in multiple ways, but also in multimedia ways. I want to just highlight the work that we've been doing with Two Cents Movement, who has been, the Two Cents Movement is a spoken word collective, and they have been in 40 schools over the last month doing a spoken word play about consent and gender-based violence, and we collaborated with them on the substance of that play. Out of that play, we created a series of messages around what is gender-based violence and how to end gender-based violence that came from the school children and their responses to the play. And we are hoping that those messages are going to be visible on billboards in different parts of the country over the 16 days of activism. Our goal here is not just generational movement building, but that young people also get a chance to speak back to the nation in their own words about not only what they understand as gender-based violence, but what they consider to be some of the solutions. So if you see those, that's the genesis of that work, which we hope to continue again for another year. This is the second year that we've been doing the Red Card Rape Culture Workshop, which is a workshop around rape culture that is specifically targeted at groups of men. Again, it's interactive, it's meant to be fun, it's meant to create a safe space for men to engage with each other in terms of what they understand as rape culture, what they understand as consent, what they understand as sexual violence, and what they understand as the role of men and boys in creating a world free from violence against women. So the Institute has been involving graduate students in facilitating that as part of enabling another generation to develop the facilitation skills combined with methodologies that we think help reach people where they are, but also allow for collective learning. We've also just recently completed the awards for schools that participated in our Break the Silence competition, which was geared at enabling schools to use artwork to create messages and to raise consciousness about child sexual abuse and incest. In the award ceremony, a number of schools participated, such as Caracachayma, schools from Caracachayma, Blanchardshire, Swaha, etc. And so we're aiming to again continue this work over the next years. If you go to our website, you will see that we produced a toolkit for doing work on child sexual abuse and incest in schools, which can be available for you to use as well. Some of our staff have been participating in this question of violence against women, not just in events that we organize. So, for example, we collaborated with TUCO and the Office of the Prime Minister on a forum on violence in Calypso lyrics. Dr. Suhan Bharat presented there. And so at different levels, the BTS project has been led by Professor Rhoda Reddock since inception. The Red Card Rape Culture and Two Cents Movement work is led by myself. Dr. Bharat has been doing work on Calypso violence, misogyny, and women's sexuality for a number of years. Finally, I'd just like to say that our collaborations extend to Carryman, which is a Caribbean organization of men organizing around gender equality, and we will also be with them at their meeting next week, where again we will be raising these issues of gender equality, gender justice, and gender violence. Today's forum is particularly important because the question of violence against women remains so ubiquitous and so devastating. And I think those in the women's movement might be able to offer more insight than me. But what I can tell you is that over the years, I've wondered about the efficacy of big approaches. You know, we have been advocating for a national gender policy for 14 years, just in this instance, but for say 23 years in the longer struggle, and still today do not have one. And today's particular approach is really, really important because, as you will see, the recommendations are ones that are highly achievable, right? They're not the big, high, difficult to reach fruit, as they say. They're the low-hanging ones. Right? And that's, I think, an approach that we also need to strategically use as we're trying to move parts ahead, where it is the big gains are ones that we find it intractable and difficult, even when we try multiple strategies. And so I think the strategy here is one that we are hoping, that we're experimenting with as a form of dealing with these issues in ways that are achievable in the short term. To that end, The Institute has also been thinking about how do we make sure that in everything we do, we're able to not only bring research and collaboration with the women's movement together, but also how are we able to try and push impact, right? How can we make sure our work has impact? And that's the tradition that the Institute, of the Institute historically. When you see the 10 amendments and you see how they are put together, how they're projected, and how they're disseminated in the rollout, there are two ideas behind that. One is the idea of spark feminism, which is guiding the Institute's work since 2016. It's the idea that if we take small, manageable messaging, sparks, right? Things that can travel through memes, things that can travel on Instagram, things that can travel on billboards, on social media, sparks, that maybe you can just get that spark to touch somebody else, right? And in so doing, advance these issues that feminists have been advocating on for a long time. So when you see spark feminism on the labels for things, that's what that is, right? It's the idea of moving through the way social media allows us with a spark. You may also see branding that says, in various things that we do, IGDS impact. And that's because we want to be able to really situate and lead the university in making sure that everything that we do is aiming to have a national and regional impact. So when you see those tags, that's what they mean. We have, of course, wanted to engage social media in our rollout a bit more. But the thing about using social media is it can become oversaturated. And that's why you want to have messages that are really easy to grasp and which anybody could move across wherever they are. So what I do want to ask you all is that you can go to the EOC website, you can go to our website, and when you see these messages, please, our spark moves to your spark, and your spark moves to another spark. And in so doing, or I was going to say we're down patriarchy, but I think we're live streaming. I'm not saying that. Finally, what I want to say is that in this approach, we want to continue our support to the really important work of the women's movement, and to continue to commit our support to the women's movement and to feminists, as well as to gender justice initiatives by the state and civil society. In the last few months, I've been conducting research on intimate partner violence through a lot of qualitative data collections. And what I can tell you is that the protection order system is not working, and I can tell you that the Domestic Violence Act, there are necessary amendments to the Domestic Violence Act that can really help transform women's lives. And sometimes they seem like small things, but when you understand the micro injustices that women experience as they try to go through the justice system, you see how micro changes can make all the difference. To that end, and in terms of making all the difference, we have created a letter writing campaign in the spirit of Amnesty International's long, successful strategy, and we hope that all of you, as you hear about it more over the morning, will pick up each of those letters, sign them, and then send them by the bagfuls to the correct offices in the state, so that, again, as the spark moves, it moves from us to you and to wherever it is can make an impact. So thank you all for being part of this experiment on multiple levels with us, and thank you all to be willing to share a spark that we hope really does transform women's lives, and especially during 16 days of activism gives us real tools that we can mobilize and real strategies that we can mobilize to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hossain. Commitment, support, collaboration, and we are all here quite familiar with that focus and that endeavor at the center of our work. I would like to welcome Tara Maria of the U.S. Embassy, Summer Hunt of the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, and Mrs. Deborah Lee Rivera, Victim Support Unit. Thank you for joining us today in this conversation that is aimed at addressing what remains a ubiquitous and devastating problem, as Dr. Hossain said. And what is interesting as you think about the information that our next speaker will present and explain, and you prepare to contribute to the open discussion, that we want to consider new strategies or adaptations to existing strategies, experimentation, persistence, and ensuring impact, whatever medium works for us. So this is something to keep in mind as the discussion goes on. On that note, we have our presentation by the head of the Equal Opportunities Commission. Now, the head of the Equal Opportunities Commission, Mrs. Lynette Sebrand-Sweet, has done a lot of things. But at her request, we will not elaborate ad infinitum. But I will say that Mrs. Sebrand-Sweet has been an advocate for the rights of women and girls, and an avid supporter of the rule of law, due process, and social justice. And she has done so through many commissions, positions, and definitely demonstrated commitment, collaboration, and support. So it is my pleasure to welcome her here to discuss the necessary changes to the Domestic Violence Act.
Good morning, everyone. I want to associate myself with the protocols as to our invitees, our guests here this morning, and to give a special shout out to the EOC teams that we have here, which would be the EOC legal team, the EOC communications team, and the EOC IT team. You see them arrayed in orange around the room. Now, why the EOC? Before I get into the nitty-gritty and to get granular with the domestic violence issues. Why the EOC? Well, the EOC is an organization which has been specifically created to advocate for and to do research in equal opportunity and non-discrimination. So that the work that we are doing in gender is very much part of our statutory mandate, which also includes a process of actually receiving investigating and conciliating complaints in discrimination, including in sex discrimination. And one of the issues and problems that we have with our legislation is that our legislation does not permit us to investigate claims of discrimination based on sexual orientation. One of our mandates as well is to keep our legislation under review and to advise the powers that be as to when our legislation needs to be amended. And that is a proposal that we've had now since 2014 before the Ministry of the Attorney General for the amendment to our Act. Now, to get into the domestic violence legislation itself and amendments to that, I think an appropriate and a topical touching off point would be the concluding recommendations which came from the CEDAW committee at the end of Trinidad's presentation in Geneva in July of 2016. And those concluding recommendations, Crystal, on slide 5, and those well, starting from slide 4, and those concluding recommendations suggest the UN committee has suggested that Trinidad and Tobago should ensure that domestic violence is adequately investigated, prosecuted, and punished, and that there should be a central registry in respect of domestic violence, and that we need a needs assessment to be done in respect of shelters. So those are some specific recommendations coming out of the UN committee. The UN committee also specifically suggested that there should be effective enforcement of protection orders and punishment for breaches, that there should be training of law enforcement for gender-sensitive investigations and a general eliminating of persistent attitudes that treat domestic violence or intimate partner violence, as is the state-of-the-art term, as a private matter. So that in terms of our response in Trinidad and Tobago, we have what I've been describing for a little while now, and perhaps a bit controversially as a mature response to domestic violence in Trinidad and Tobago, in the sense that since 1991 we've had legislation. It was significantly amended in 1999, and we have many mechanisms already in place to address the issue, not the least of which is jurisdiction that has been created in the Magistrates Court, which is heavily subscribed in the sense that every year there are approximately 10,000 applications across the 13 magisterial jurisdictions in Trinidad and Tobago seeking relief under the domestic violence legislation. So it is a remedy that theoretically is cheap, easily accessible, and does not need an attorney, and I emphasize the word theoretically. Now, there are other intimate or domestic violence mechanisms which have been put in place as well, so it's not to say that we are just now starting Trinidad and Tobago's response on this. We have hotlines, we have shelters, we have a number of government programs, and we have a number of NGOs which specifically work in the area. We have the Rape Crisis Society, we have the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, to name two of the more venerable and earliest established of the organizations. There are a plethora following those. So that is the sense in which I say that Trinidad and Tobago already has a response, and of course, it is now time to tweak that response, and it is now time to take that response to zero tolerance. It's a popular phrase, zero tolerance, but it is very meaningful in respect of the domestic violence response, because there are many provisions already existing in the Act which are not properly enforced, which we don't know about, and which need to be taken to zero tolerance. So when we're looking at the tweaking or the of the domestic violence response, we're looking at in three areas. First of all, taking mechanisms that are already in place to zero tolerance. Secondly, we're looking at strengthening and bolstering up provisions in the Act that are already in place. Thirdly, we need to be looking at new sections and new provisions in the legislation. And fourthly, we need to be looking at a number of policies and protocols, including interagency protocols, which need to be put in place. So it's not simply a question of a 10-point amendment to the Domestic Violence Act. These are just some of the major highlights of the amendments and new sections and policies that we need. Now, so let's just quickly get into the question of what the Act does say, and what the Act does have a very broad definition of domestic violence to include physical, sexual, emotional, psychological abuse, and so on. One of the granular amendments that we need is to look at the definition of psychological violence in the Act, because what that now says is that the emotional and physical abuse, to include abuse using social media and using the telephone, needs to be strengthened and it needs to be broadened, because now it simply prohibits use of the telephone in the home and in the workplace. That's not good enough, because we take our telephones and our computers and our laptops and our tablets with us everywhere, so that it's not only in the home and in the workplace that abuse in these areas needs to be prohibited. So there's a broad definition of the category of persons that can apply. It includes children, it includes the elderly, it includes cohabitants, and it includes persons living in visiting relationships, it includes siblings. The problem is that it does not include same-sex partners. And that is a critical amendment which needs to be put in place in terms of the definition of cohabitant or spouse in the definition section of the legislation. Now, so what exactly is the protection order, which is the principal remedy that is created by this legislation? It's a protection order, it's a thing. What it is a sort of injunction. It is a prohibition, prohibiting someone from doing something which they should not have been doing in the first place anyway. In the first instance, it's not punitive. It is merely meant to highlight and demonstrate what specifically a person is not supposed to do. So that in the first instance, unless, for example, it actually prohibits you from being in your home, it is not punitive. So that is something that is very important to understand. It's a sort of quasi-civil remedy. It does not descend to a criminal remedy as yet, which in the first instance would have penalties. Now, so that protection order can last up to 3 years. And some of the things that it can do, because as I said, there are many things in the legislation which are appropriate and which are good, but which are not utilized or not utilized to zero tolerance. So, for example, the protection order can mandate counseling. And this is one of the areas in which protection orders are frequently flouted. So that the protection order says that you must go to counseling, you don't go to counseling, and nothing happens. Although, in the Act, there is a specific section which says that if you do not go to counseling, you are guilty of a criminal offense and can be charged $3,000 as a fine. So I'll get into the question of breaches of the protection order in a bit. Now, so the protection order, is that it? No. Power has gone here. Have I stepped on something? The protection order, as I said, can last up to 3 years, and it can be renewed beyond that if you make the application for it to be renewed. You can be ordered to pay compensation to the other person. For example, you've damaged their phone, you've burned their clothes, you've taken away their personal property, that sort of thing. And it can be heard in private, and this is one of the advantages of the protection order that is already in place. There is a specific magistrate in each division of the 13 divisions in Trinidad and Tobago mandated to deal with these applications, and these applications are heard in private. We have to acknowledge that as an advance over how it used to be. Now, and it must be listed for hearing within 7 days. Now, even though the legislation says it must be listed within 7 days, it is frequently listed if you can persuade the clerk of the peace in the magistrate's court that you have an emergency. It can be listed immediately, it can be listed at any time earlier than the 7 days, but it must be listed for hearing within 7 days. So that is what really the protection order does. Now, if you breach the protection order now, you have now committed a criminal offense, and then you can be fined, you can be imprisoned on a first conviction, a maximum. And whenever legislation cites a penalty, it is the maximum penalty that it cites. So that if legislation says that you can be fined $9,000 and imprisoned for 3 months, what that means is that's the maximum that the magistrate can impose, and frequently they impose much less. So it is a maximum. And so on the second, it's $15,000 imprisonment for 2 years, and finally, if it's on the third conviction, you can be jailed for 5 years. The problem is that once it is fairly simple and frequent that you get your protection order, when the protection order is breached, that is when you have serious problems with getting the authorities to respond, because you now have to invoke the discretion of a police officer to charge for breach of the protection order. Whenever police officers are administering their duties, they have a discretion as to whether to charge for something that has happened, including with respect to domestic violence. So the problem is, how do you persuade a police officer to charge when there has been a breach of the protection order? And here is an area where we need to do some tightening up of the policy and the instructions and the protocols that the police are given to work with. Now, the other problem with the question of charging for the breach of the protection order is that it is thrown into the general morass of every other criminal offense that the magistrates court have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And anybody who has been in the magistrates court will see that the average courts have lengthy lists, 30 matters, 40 matters, 70 matters. So what happens is, whilst the initial application for the protection order is dealt with privately by a dedicated magistrate, when there is a breach of the protection order now, this entire system falls down because the prosecution for the breach, which is now a police prosecution, which requires the police officer to be present to prosecute, well then everything falls down because the general system now does not accord any priority or indeed any importance to this particular crime, and it is thrown by the wayside. It just disappears. And of course, there are no special prosecutors to deal with it, so that it is given very, very little status in the general criminal courts. So a specific granular recommendation is that breaches of protection orders need to be mandatorily charged, number one, and then need to be dealt with in the specialized court instead of just being thrown into the general criminal ocean, the ocean of criminal offenses. Now, another one of the major problems with the protection order, and this one is really the one which is, in my view, going to create a revolution in domestic violence response, is the question of removing the perpetrator as opposed to the victim from the home. Now, I want to make a distinction here between the initial response of the police to a complaint of domestic violence, and this is another area in which there is a legislative provision which says that the police must respond to every complaint of domestic violence. So already we have legislation which I already don't see how that provision can be improved upon. It says the police must respond. Now, of course, we can condescend into now protocols as to exactly what they have to do first, what they have to do second, what they have to do third. But the legislation already says that they must respond. Okay. And however, what the legislation says is that they are charged with the responsibility of ensuring the safety of the victim and the safety of children. And how the police powers that be have interpreted that as a matter of policy is that it is the victim who needs the protection that must be extracted from the home. Now that wreaks havoc in terms of the rights of the victim in shelter, housing, access to property, a whole sequelae of a mess. If the victim is taken out of the home and the victim then cannot get back into the home. Because what the police do, and they are operating under their instructions, it's not to say that they are not operating under instructions. They are operating under instructions to remove the victim from the home. That instruction needs to be reversed. And one of the most salutary mechanisms that have been put in place in more developed countries that has dealt with the initial incidents and prevention of domestic violence, say for example in many states in the United States of America and in Canada, is that the police are mandated to remove the perpetrator from the home. So that is major, 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 major. And I want to make a distinction between removing the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator, from the home at the level of the initial complaint, which is where it does not happen, and the power of the magistrate's court already in existence to put the perpetrator out of the home as part of the provisions of the protection order. That's fine, and that quite frequently happens. Not as frequently as it should, but it does quite frequently happen. What I am talking about is the question of extracting the perpetrator from the home from scratch at the level of the complaint, and it has a salutary effect on the mentality and on the actions of somebody who likes to hit. Because they are given pause, hands raised. Oh my God, I may be put out of my home. No, when the police arrive, let me see the lease. Where is the deed? And from the time they observe that the ownership of the property involves the perpetrator, they back off from removing the perpetrator from the home. And this is where I say this has to be reversed. So now, if however you do that, if you only do that, you are creating another set of problems. Because you have to then create a reception protocol for the perp. You cannot just take the perp out of the home and have them making the rounds, tacking back, continuing with the abuse on the outside, stalking the home, besieging, and that sort of thing. So along with this policy change or this legislative change, is going to have to be the putting in place of a reception mechanism for the perp. Whether it be that in each police station, we have now many police stations in Trinidad and Tobago, whether each police station is mandated to have a reception area, maybe a special cell or a special room where the perp can be kept until such time as an intervention can take place. Whether it is an mental health intervention, whether it is an intervention for drug offending, whatever is the particular issue of the perpetrator. So it's not just, you can't just simply take the perp out of the home. You also have to provide for his reception or her reception. It's all gender neutral. Huh? Now, so we need to have some emphasis on programs for the perps. Now, in terms of interagency protocols, I mean, there are about 16 stakeholders here that I can just reel off. That should be the subject of interagency protocols. Of course, you have the police, you have the prosecutors, the magistrates, the DPP, the judges, the social workers, the mental health workers, the drug interventionists, the Ministry of Housing, the Ministry of Social Welfare, the NGOs, the specialized NGOs, the shelters, the Children's Authority, the Victim Support Unit, many stakeholders who need to engage across the board in various kinds of interagency protocols so that people are on the same pages and part of the same continuum of response. Now, one of the biggest problems with the domestic violence responses protection order is that once you've given the person, the victim, the protection order, what you've in effect given them is a piece of paper. You've given them a piece of paper, and frequently giving them the piece of paper makes them even more vulnerable without more. And this is another one of the major granular amendments to the domestic violence response that we need to put in place, because we need now to create a duty on the part of observers to do something when they are observing a breach of the protection order. And this has happened in the past. Duties have been created and people have come, societies have come to understand responsibilities and duties where they did not have them before. And let me quote the very fact that in 1991, the police assumed, kicking and screaming, and with a lot of training, a lot of counseling, a lot of persuading, assumed the responsibility for responding to domestic violence. They did not do that before. Before, they were able to hide behind the general societal perception that this was a private thing. And when you have this philosophy that it's a private thing, it's to be kept behind doors, behind the bedroom doors and under the beds, that then permits those responsible for responding to obviously what are crimes and violence, that permits them to say, well, this is not for me, or this is not for me. So that the police now understand and embrace, not fully, not completely, they need a lot of help, they need a lot of support, they need a lot of training, they need a lot of counseling, they need many things. But they do accept their responsibility to respond. What I'm saying is that we need now to move to another level of societal response, where each and every one of us needs to assume a legal duty to respond when a person has a protection order in hand. And it can be done. Because there are many observers, you have other family members, you have employers, you have medical, you have religious, you have passers-by on the street, you have public agencies. When a person has a protection order in hand, a network of support, legal network of support, must be thrown up around them so that it means something. And I dare say we may have to create some sort of hotline, an agency. It could be a partnership between the government and NGOs to train the public as to responding, to letting them know how they are to respond, and then to set up the intervention mechanism for responding. And as I am on this, I'm sort of not able to keep track of where I've reached in terms of time. Let me just say, that one of the more important innovations that we need in this response is that where the police do not, where the police, because as I said, the legislation already provides that the police must respond. There is a section of the act that says the police must respond. There is impunity on the part of the police for not responding. So we're going to deal with that. We have a law that says they must respond, but nothing happens if they don't respond. So that now has to do with the culture in the police service. It has to do with the resources available at their disposal. It has to do with the attitude of the senior management of the police. It has to do with the police training. It has to do with the all sorts of resourcing issues. But the point is this: impunity for not responding should not be tolerated. And what I'm suggesting is that we already have, for example, a police complaints authority. I'm not suggesting that the bureaucratic mechanism of the police complaints authority is appropriate for dealing with inappropriate responses by the police to a complaint of domestic violence. What I'm saying is that the police complaints authority can be called upon to create a special mechanism within their ambit, because they already have a whole act of parliament, a whole authority, staff and everything. I do not see why they cannot be persuaded to create a special response mechanism, again, perhaps involving a hotline, and of course involving staffing, training, the whole 9 yards, so that the police officers already know what their duty is. When they do not fulfill their duty, that there is a mechanism of immediate, direct, quick complaint, which of course has to be advertised. They have to know that they have this remedy, or else they will continue to go away, feeling further violated by the complaint system. So, in terms now of the statistics, I already demonstrated. I believe that in the packages have been given out the paper that has been prepared by the Equal Opportunity Commission on this. And at the back of that document, and indeed if you go on the judiciary's website, you will see that they have an annual report every year, and there you will see the approximately 10,000 applications for protection orders that are made every year in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, of course, this now it's not in conformity with the police statistics, because this is not a police response. This is the response of somebody who has made an application for a protection order in the magistrate's court. It's different from somebody who has made a complaint to the police that have been assaulted and the police charges. Now, another problem that we have in the domestic violence response is that whilst already existing in the criminal law, it is an offense, it is an assault offense to hit your spouse or your significant other. When you go to the police station on the Saturday night or whenever it is, bleeding or with your bust head or whatever, and you explain to the police, well, look, I have been assaulted, or I am being assaulted, or I can't go back home. Instead of charging you with the already existing criminal offense that you have committed, and which if you had done it to a stranger, you would be charged. They tell you, go by the clock in the peace Monday morning and bring an application for protection. So this is a faulty response, because if it is that a crime has been committed, then the crime should be charged for. So that is what happens now. You go to the police station, you say, look, they tell you, look, wait until Monday morning and we can't bother with that. You go by the JP Monday morning and bring an application for your protection. So there are parallel mechanisms that need to be enforced for zero tolerance. Now, so as I said, the police statistics are being grossly underreported. They're all over the place, the CAPA statistics and so on. Suffice it to say that we have about 25 women being killed every year in Trinidad and Tobago. That's approximately 2 a month. And that brings me now to one of the amendments or policy changes that we definitely have to put in place. And that is that we need to have a specific crisis intervention protocol for when someone is threatening to kill another person in a situation of domestic violence. Because many have been the occasions in Trinidad and Tobago when persons have been killed. These 25 that are killed per year. If you go back and you look at the newspaper reports, if you look at these statistics, you will see that many of them have protection orders. So that is absolutely ridiculous. For a society that has given a woman a protection order, for that person to be killed with a protection order in hand. And frequently when questions are asked, when the press go, and the press talk to neighbors, they talk to passers-by, they talk to other family members, what the other family members say is that this extreme violence has been being threatened for weeks, for days, for months. So that is unacceptable. If it is that somebody is threatening, actually articulating that they are going to kill you or they're going to do for you, whatever it is, we need to have a mechanism to deal with that. We need to have a specific way to deal with that. That there needs to be a duty, and of course the victim is hardly able to access these mechanisms themselves. Other persons around them need to trigger these mechanisms. That's why I said that the legislation needs to create a broader duty on the part of all of the observers and the witnesses to domestic violence and the neighbors of the persons who are suffering the domestic violence to respond. And I mean, I know that I have, the time is an issue, and you have the list. The list is by no means exhaustive. One of the items, one of the issues that needs to be taken to zero tolerance right now is that there is in existence a section of the Domestic Violence Act which says that the Commissioner of Police must keep a domestic violence register. But what is happening to that register? Is that register being kept? Is that register being updated? And that is another provision that needs to be taken to zero tolerance. Another provision already existing in the law that needs to be taken to zero tolerance is the fact that that a magistrate can refuse bail. I don't know if anybody ever heard of a magistrate refusing bail, but a magistrate, because our legal system is infused with the theory that every person who is charged with a criminal offense is entitled to bail, except if it is a capital offense, murder, sedition. So that you any kind of violence offense short of murder, you're entitled to bail. That is not appropriate in the situation of domestic violence. So therefore there needs to be a philosophy infused in the magistrates that they can utilize their currently existing power to refuse bail, or at least refuse bail until an intervention has taken place with the perpetrator on the basis that the victim is still in danger. So there are, as I said, there are many provisions that are already in the legislation that need to be taken to zero tolerance, many provisions that need to be strengthened, many provisions, many new sections that need to be created, and of course a lengthy list of protocols and policies that need to be put in place. Let me see if there's any other thing that I need specifically to address. Amend the definition of competent, of course. This is slide 18. Police must charge for assaults and for breaches of protection orders, and I have quoted the sections there. No bail for persons, the network of support. This is the new section where you need to create the fresh duty, the intervention for the perks, the interagency protocols, the monitoring programs for both victims and police, and enforcing them, enforcing these orders for attendance to these programs. It's not good enough to tell somebody they have to go. You have to make sure that they go. The resuscitating of the police domestic violence register and so on. So as I said, there are a number of others. These are just the main highlights, and well, we are here to continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Sieberand-Sweet. So you hear quite a lot to consider: taking mechanisms to zero tolerance, strengthening existing provisions, new provisions in legislation, policies and protocols implementation, network support, and on a greater level, addressing ideological issues in terms of philosophy of violence and policing, training, responsibility. So much to consider as we move to our next segment, which is the response. But before we get to that, there are just a few things I'd like you to take note of. First of all, as you know, the Institute for Gender and Development Studies. 1 second. How everybody feeling? Good? Right. So, just a few things to note. As you know, the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, we are committed to collaborating, to research and research with impact. And as Dr. Hosai reminded me, we couldn't be here without the Sexual Cultures of Justice Project. I almost botched the name there, Dr. Nixon, which is headed up by Dr. Angelique Nixon. And she will elaborate more on this project, which addresses directly gender-based violence. But it is through this project that we were able to then collaborate and have Mrs. Sieberand-Sweet and have this discussion today. So we're really quite pleased that that opportunity emerged. The second thing is, this program is being streamed live on Facebook. So you are already here. But if you have colleagues or friends or others who would like to join in as we proceed during this morning, you just go to the web page of the Equal Opportunity Commission. Sorry, the Facebook page of the Equal Opportunity Commission. It is live and you can take it. So send a message quick. Social media is very fast. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of our professors and heads, and especially cite Professor Byron for hosting us in this room. We do appreciate your accommodation. We would like to acknowledge the presence of the International Labour Organization's representative and of Womantra, another of our civil society partners. If you are interested in the details, well, a more detailed excerpt of the position paper from which these points were taken, you can have a copy at the back of the room. So you can, at the end, get a copy of that paper so you can, look further at some of the challenges that we have to face. And those of you who received full packages from the EOC, there are details in those packages. Now we move on, and it is my pleasure to introduce the respondents to Mrs. Sieberand-Sweet's presentation and evaluation of some of the necessary changes to the Domestic Violence Act. And I think it was a passionate presentation, and it demonstrated a deep embedded involvement, and I think we need another round of applause. Thank you so much. I was taking notes rapidly, reminded me of my student days. We have responded, Miss Gemma Taylor Alexander and Miss Deborah Lee Rivera. Right? Gemma Taylor Alexander has been involved with social work and domestic violence related issues for more than 8 years. Again, commitment. Ms. Alexander holds an Associate Social Work degree and a BSc in Social Work from the College of Science, Technology, and Applied Arts of Trinidad and Tobago. She is currently a Victim and Witness Support Officer in the Eastern Division of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and is certified in HIV/AIDS voluntary counseling and testing and project management. She is passionate about human rights as the fundamental rights of individuals to live with freedom from fear, freedom from abuse or injustice, and to be free to explore one's full potential in keeping with moral standards and principles. Deborah Lee Rivera, also a student at the IGBS, so we're claiming her first, but she has more. She's a trained clinical psychologist who works with the Victim and Witness Support Unit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service since 2008. She earned a BSc in Psychology with honors and an MSc in Clinical Psychology from the University of the West Indies. She has received training and is certified in nonverbal communication and deception, detection, mediation, pre- and post-HIV counseling, critical incident stress management, victim assistance, trauma incident reduction, and narrative therapy. In addition to working with victims of crime, she was an adjunct lecturer with the Catholic Religious Development Institution in the Guidance and Counseling Program and has done training workshops with government and non-government organizations in areas such as domestic violence, stress management, victim assistance, and sexual harassment. She's a member of the American Psychological Association, Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists, and Soroptimist International, and is currently working on her MPhil in Interdisciplinary Gender Studies at the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus in the area of intimate partner violence. Deborah, a lot. Now, what is important to note is that we have these two women who, from their bios, have been involved in this issue from multiple angles. So they will respond, and it is my pleasure to welcome them to the mic.
Okay, good morning to everyone. All protocols observed. It's a pleasure to be here. I just want to give a little intro to the Victim and Witness Support Unit. We are not doing a PowerPoint presentation because the time is really short. The unit was established in 2008 and there are offices within all 9 divisions within the police service. Now the officers that work within the unit generally provide the type of support that would include counseling, individual counseling, group counseling, guidance to the criminal justice system, information on the progress of the investigations, and also we liaise with different support agencies, just to mention some of our major core duties. All right. As you listen to Ms. Sebaran's tweet, and we really felt moved by her presentation because a lot of what she said, Ms. Taylor and I, we experienced it because we are all in the police station, so we are just like nodding our head and saying, yeah, we know that happens. For the period 2009 to 2014, using the CAPA stats, which is the crime and problem analysis of the TPS stats, they would have said that there were 11,307 domestic violence reports that would have come in from the different divisions between that period. Now, within that period also, Southern, because we work within the divisions of the police service, and Southern would have been a big highlight because the numbers would have been extremely high, extremely high. We have officers in all the areas, but unfortunately right now we do not have any staff in Tobago. Okay, so that's how it goes. So without further ado, how we are going to do it today, we're going to address the 10 points, what we can address, what we do on the ground, and I don't know if there's a question and answer segment, I don't know how that works, but open discussion after. Okay, my bad. All right, so we will proceed.
Okay, good morning everybody, all protocols observed again. So in relation to the first question about removing the perpetrator from the home and not the victim in situations of domestic violence, what we see, according to what was said before, is that the woman is usually the one who is extracted from the home. If the woman is single and every situation is different, they may have been renting, the home may not have been hers. Yes, it's easy for her to self-determine and say, okay, I ain't going back. That kind of thing, she would easily go into a safe home if no other relative is available to, provide that safety for her. But in more than often situations, the woman has children or she has a child, these children are attending school, it is difficult to take the entire family to a safe house, and there are some safe houses who may not take boy children, so there are challenges. So we at the Victim Support Unit agree with what was said before, where the perpetrator, at least in the interim, should be extracted from the home until a more informed assessment is made in terms of level of future threats to the woman. Question 2, police must respond to all complaints. Yes, we agree. Police must respond to all complaints. On the ground level, having interacted with multiple victims of domestic violence, we see sometimes a level of, indifference. And police officers are human too. So I don't want to take up for them. But the situation is that sometimes a woman would come into the station and she may come even with bruises. She would make the report, we would counsel with the victim, help her to be able to cope with the situation, work out, sort out her situation in her head as what she wants to do, and walk her through the process, even to make a protection order or a restraining order. And then on the day of the court matter, she does nothing. Or she might attend to get a restraining order. Sometimes she goes back to the home. We are human beings, things happen, right? So she may come and she may be abused again and come back to the police station. It is our right to come back to the police station. It is the police officer's responsibility to take the report again. But over a period of time, desensitization starts to take place.
Okay, and I can add to that by what happens, Ms. Severance, we spoke about the cultures that are involved. And we would see different responses happening in different parts of Trinidad and Tobago. Because we must remember that many times these police officers live within the police districts that they work with. So many times they know the persons. I mean, I've heard that countless times. And most of the time, as usual, they know the men more because they line with the men. They are friends with the men. And many times they would tell the men that they, who's here? And they do not respond. Or they say, go back and speak with him. So it is a cultural issue a lot of times. A lot of times it is just a norm because we have tried to treat with officers who are also new officers. They're just passed out on probation. So we would go around to the different stations within the different divisions and have little sessions with them to let them know this is what is expected, which is part of their policing procedures, of course. But, we gently remind them. But being in the environment, the policing culture, and just that whole pressure of having to do what the seniors say or not stand, if you can't stand out, they sometimes fall into that. All right, but what we try to do, because we do not only get referrals from the police, this is our major way, but we get from different persons, stakeholders, persons who call, we get reports, we see in the newspaper, we try to make contact throughout. You can call and let us know. We sometimes will take that and then we will bring it back to the station, the police officer to the station, and if we will walk through it, which is what we really need to do and we try to do. Now the way I'm referring to is just 17 officers. So it's a bit small for the entire Trinidad, but we have a hands-on approach whereby we will walk it through. Liaising with the officer, liaising with the victim, as the case may be, the children, the shelters, the hospitals, because we have done that as well, go to the hospital, go to court with them, you know, all those things that have to be done on the ground. All right.
The next question was, the police must charge for assaults and other crimes omitted in domestic situations. So we say the Act explicitly says that somebody should be charged when a crime is committed, stick to the Act. So the police have a responsibility to follow the guidelines of the Act. This is what guides our society. This is what creates order. So we say simply stick to the Act.
However, it's not, because there are always howevers, right? And it's not done in several of the instances. And we then have a dual role, because we are the compassionate arm of the TTPS, that's what we call ourselves. We have a dual role whereby we try to show the officer, you know, maybe it may be wise to do this instead of doing that. And I mean, that's really how it goes. And if I could draw on an example where within the Cuba district, where a person, a female, she has come several times to make reports. But she of herself, sometimes the persons come and they want the person warned. You know, people, they have this way, they come and start wanting to be warned. And warned has a sort of connotation that he's just spoken to in a very gentle way, or, you know, don't do that, stop doing that. But it gets worse. And the police officers, sadly, sometimes they themselves, now after warning 3-4 times, they don't take the person seriously because you wanted them, you sure you want this now. And that's when we may have to step in and say, well, you know, the Act really does say this is what should be done. So, you know, because of her situation, because of what she's going through, she is a victim. It's a work in progress every day. Okay.
So next question, provide network of support for persons who have protection orders. Observers must have a duty to report. So at the Victim Support Office or unit, we provide counsel and support for individuals. Sometimes a person would come in, she would make a report or not. Sometimes she just go into the charge room and say, look, I need to talk to the Victim Support Officer, without even speaking to the police officer about what has happened. So we would counsel with her, dependent on the situation and what she decides. She would make the report or not. Sometimes she would say, look, I just want a little talk to him, as Ms. Rivera has said. We would call, and I'm at Eastern, so I would make contact with the perpetrator, the spouse, and in most cases, they come in and in San Grande, and I'm in San Grande and Toku. So most cases that they come in and they really try to work it out. You see that they make efforts to work it out. One or two cases I may have gone through over a period of time, and you realize, look, irreconcilable. We just cannot work it out, and they have chosen to divorce, or in some domestic common law relationships, they decide to separate, and that is fine, right? However, we still try to work with them, helping them to recognize when children are involved. You're still tied to the hip, so to speak, because you're still mommy and you're still daddy, and you have to find a way to communicate amicably with each other in the best interest of the children, because now you have to focus now on the children. In terms of the observers, where persons in the community, the police, we all as individuals, persons living in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a civic responsibility to look out for each other. Yeah, that is undeniable. So your neighbor has an issue, call anonymously, look, something is happening next door. Sometimes you just use the right opportunity, the right time to even talk to your neighbor and let them know, look, I have made an observation and I care about you. However you need to put it, you would know this person best, to try to persuade them to get the help that they need, because sometimes all somebody needs to know is that somebody has killed. Yes?
On the other point, we do not necessarily deal with the perpetrators of crime, we more deal with the victims. But as Ms. Taylor said, there are times and in certain areas we deal with both the male and the female in that relationship. It happens a lot in the eastern, in Sangre Grande, more rural areas, if I can say, as opposed to the urban areas, where you would find a man coming in to make a report, and then the next hour, the woman comes in to make a report. And they expect to, thrash it out, talking, and that happens rurally. But in urban, like in northern and so on, no, that does not happen. So we do not necessarily treat as a rule with the perpetrators, because we have to look at the safety of ourselves, safety of the persons making the report, and how is that going to play out. All right? Sure.
Alright, so I just want to give an example in terms of a perpetrator committed a domestic violence offense against his spouse. So this would have been an elderly gentleman in his senior years, approximately 66 years old, and his spouse would have been about 43 or so. So they would have been living together, common law relationship over a period of time, and he would have made significant investment to her personal well-being and educational status and so on. And what subsequently happened is that she decided to went a little outside something. So that didn't work out well, of course, and he really tried to kill her, slit her throat. It didn't work out, thank God. But both of them ended up in the police station, and he decided he wanted to commit suicide. So of course, me being the victim support officer, being on site, I was solicited by the officers to make an intervention. So I was able to work with him to help him calm himself and to try to sort out his thoughts and think more clearly in terms of even his own well-being, right? So again, we don't deal with the perpetrators per se, but from a humanistic approach, if it's necessary at a point in time, we do.
Okay, moving along. At present, we share good relations with the magistrates, with the criminal justice system generally, because there are many times magistrates would call on us directly to come to the court to speak to a matter. What do we think? Or they might ask us to meet with the person. If we have that type of relationship, they may call and say, can you meet with the person? Or they may just send the person without anything, we just send them. In addition to that, 5 minutes, that's fine. In addition to that, we also do a lot of work with the DPP office, whereby we prepare persons for trial based on, may not be domestic or domestic violence matters, but sexual matters and so on. And we also would liaise with the various social workers in the various departments, whether it be health, education, etc., etc. Okay, I'm starting a little fast.
Okay, in terms of creating mandatory programs for victims and perpetrators, well, yes, we agree with that, having programs for each person in terms of empowering the female. And where the man is concerned, we looked at some studies that would have been conducted in Maryland, and the objectives are some things that we could try to adopt here in terms of the treatment objectives. So one, as it relates to the offender, that is, to increase the offender's responsibility for his battering behavior, to help him to understand the dysfunction in his behavior. And 2, to develop behavioral alternatives to battering. What is an alternative to the aggression? Right? Understanding self. 3, to increase constructive expression of all emotions, listening skills and anger control. So that, sometimes we'll be talking to our spouses and we know they're hearing us, but are they really listening, right? Are we really in tune with each other?
Okay, and to that, we have done groups, support groups. We have had groups with children, students from a school. We have had support groups with adults, domestic violence victims, both females and males are a little troublesome to get them to come, but we have had groups dealing with these matters already. We presently now have a group in, what are they doing? I think it's homicide, victims of homicide. It's a support group. So we look at this area whereby we see we can have groups and how effective group support is for persons who may be affected by this.
In addition, number 4, to decrease dependency on and control of the relationship. So some people feel if I can't be with you, nobody else can have you. You're my whole life. So to work on that. And number 5, to increase the abuser's understanding of the family and his role in it. Because we know that some men, based on their background and experience, may not know adequately how to exercise their headship with love. Yeah? Okay, now. I put myself in some hot water here. Okay, so yes, we talking about women and women's issues. We're also talking about equal opportunity, but yeah. So okay, as a woman, some women believe that the husband is the one that, more or less they will consult with on decisions to be made. Yeah? So that's what I mean.
It's not equal.
So he's not the boss for you. It's just partner.
Okay, we are wrapping up now because we have got 1 minute, and I think we have, with regards to the register, well, we have never seen a register. I've never seen a register in any of the stations that exist. The act says, I agree that it has to, but I'm saying because we have spoken about it, I've asked, and persons always like, what? Not known about it. I have never seen anywhere that always asked. And they don't know about it, but it has to be enforced. And we think it should be done more so from the academy where persons are passing out, and then, constantly have to be updated on what is to be done, retrained. Now, one thing I did not remember to say before was that training has been done with officers during the period 2014-2015. Comprehensive training was done with officers from Trinidad and Tobago in different divisions, of which we were part of. There was a legal aspect, there was, I think, the coalition was part of it as well. Probably about 700 officers would have been done in that period of time. Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss. We got in trouble there. Already got in trouble. Ms. Alexander and Ms. Lee Rivera. Now, I think from this response, what we're able to see is the way that this act and some of these necessary changes is in fact mediated by material conditions, legal conditions, or responses to legal conditions when you are embedded in that context, cultural conditions that definitely indicate how people decide what is pressing, what is not, etc., etc., gendered expectations. We spoke a lot about legitimized couples. We spoke a lot about traditional arrangements, but as we pointed out with the necessary changes, there are other ways that people live and experience intimate personal violence or domestic violence, and blind spots. As all of us in our commitment we have to attend to blind spots. And it is not unless we confront it directly that we will see these blind spots. And on that note, I think Dr. Nixon can elaborate really well through her work in the Sexual Culture of Justice Project, how she and her team are not only addressing violence, but some of these blind spots. Welcome.
Hi everyone, good morning, welcome. We're running really late, so I'm gonna go very quickly so we can get to our open discussion. And one of the things that we really hope to do today was to bring many voices together to have a discussion about what you think of these very important 10 recommendations. And I'm just gonna speak a little bit about the Sexual Culture of Justice Project, which is really an exciting university community collaboration in which we're building what we're calling a sexual culture of justice, which is about transforming cultural norms and attitudes about gender and sexuality. And in particular, we're interested in working towards a project that is very activity focused. And we're working with 6 organizations, and we're looking at transformative approaches to partner violence, homophobia, bullying, and policing, which is how we ended up here with a partnership. We have a memorandum of understanding with the Equal Opportunity Commission and the project, and we're actually working on police training that would address both gender-based violence issues as well as LGBTI bias. And so that is our partnership with the EOC, and we're happy to start off our 16 days of activism here. And so just to tell you briefly, you can get a press release about the project and find more information about it, but just briefly, it's a human rights project funded by the European Union, and it's implemented by University of the West Indies Institute for Gender and Development Studies in collaboration with 6 LGBTI and feminist organizations in Trinidad and Tobago. CAISO, Friends for Life, I Am One, the Silver Lining Foundation, Womantra, and the Women's Caucus of Trinidad and Tobago. And it provides 3 years of support for some of the longest standing and emerging local efforts to transform approaches to partner violence, homophobia, bullying, and policing, while also building partnerships and organizational capacity. So we're doing a number of things over the 3 years, just a few highlights. We're going to address and prevent, working through different activities, the bullying of young people related to sex and gender. We're also giving families, teachers, and police new concepts and tools to fulfill their obligations to ensure justice for those they protect and support. We're supporting LGBTQ groups through new organizational culture, sharing space and infrastructure, developing new and accessible knowledge products that strengthen local advocacy grounded in Caribbean theories, praxis, evidence, and analysis. And we're supporting a diverse group of men in becoming champions against gender-based violence to support gender equality in different communities through workshops and media creation, and finally campaigning for legal protection from unjust discrimination through the Equal Opportunity Amendment. And so more on those projects and activities later, but right now we really need to get to our open discussion, and we really want to hear from you, and so I turn it over now to our open discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nixon. As a matter of fact, we will go directly to that. We will have Dr. Hossain and Mrs. Seabrand-Sweet lead the discussion, and there are a number of microphones around the room. You can ask your question and raise your hand, please, so that you can be seen and ask your question. Would you all like a few questions and then? Yeah. Sure. So a few questions and about 3 questions, and then response and so forth. So we get in as much as possible in the time allotted.
Also, we do have a rapporteur who will be taking notes, so we can share these after and make sure that we get all of the comments and suggestions from everyone.
Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Khadija Sunanan. I'm a co-director of Womantra and Dana Timiago. Good morning, Senior. Thank you for the very comprehensive presentation. And thank you also for the feedback from the Victim and Witness Support Unit. I have a couple of points, so I'll try to go quickly. The first question around the police reporting and the development of the registry. The registry will not be at the station, as you mentioned, but what is supposed to happen is the reporting of domestic violence in a particular form which is contained in the Act. what is happening is that, well, in my limited experience, the officers don't seem to be familiar with the form at all. And it's quite a comprehensive form. It actually identifies what charges were laid against the person. If you haven't laid the charges, identify why. What weapons were used. It's very, very comprehensive. And quite recently, I visited a station and I showed a form to the officer and he had not seen it before in his life. So they're reporting domestic violence and whatever is the existing reporting modules, not attaching specific, not using the recommended forms in the law. So there's nothing to put in the registry because what are they using the forms at all? And there's also an issue of when the warnings take place, are they taking any reports? If sometimes a warning may take place and then subsequent to that, additional things happen and you want to now proceed with your protection order, but you have no documentation from the first incident because they just had a conversation and they didn't take a report, and that has been a real issue. A second issue, because I know one of the recommendations is around the criteria to apply for and get a protection order, and we're looking at same-sex, and that's very important. Another issue to note is the protection of younger women who may be in shorter-term relationships, because the Act provides for you can apply for an order if you're in a visiting relationship for a period exceeding 12 months. That is not always the case, because you may have people in shorter-term relationships, a lot of violence taking place, and they are completely excluded from the protection because they do not satisfy the requirements. So I think a more appropriate trigger would be, has violence occurred in the situation, let them assess that and then get a protection order granted accordingly. Because also people get the impression that then this is just for intimate partner situations. But it's also for elderly abuse. All of those things all of those persons can be protected under the process. But we have this thing about this for husband and wife things, and only visiting relationships of a particular time. So a young person now has very little recourse for protection if the accuser on the other side is smart enough to say, well, we haven't actually been together that long. And that has happened. I've had a conversation with a colleague of mine who frequently represents abusers. And this is the tactic that you use. You try to get them out at the locus point where they say, you know what, actually you can't even apply for the act because you haven't been in the relationship for long enough. So it's a challenge. There is a protection order process under the Offences Against the Persons Act. And another recommendation would be to see if those two processes speak to each other. The difficulty with the Offences Against the Persons Act process is that the court can only issue that order after conviction, which, as we know, will take however long. Exactly. And then the breaches of that order, there's a far less severe penalty for those orders. Because of course, if you're dealing with a younger person who's in that situation, you're trying to say, well, they can't get a protection order this way, how else can we protect you? And the order under that process, the Offences Against the Persons Act, is only available in harassment and putting a person in fear of violence. Again, charges that are not commonly preferred by the police. So this is another challenge. One of the last things I wanted to talk about is, the standards being used when it happens when the cases are actually being heard. Because again, based on this conversation I had with a colleague of mine, it appeared that if the respondent, the abuser, is represented, they will conduct the case much as a normal magistrate's court matter. There's no case to answer, your worship, etc., etc. But it's a civil standard that applies to these types of cases, and that's made very clear in the law. But sometimes if you have two attorneys on the other side, they will try and conduct this as if it's a normal criminal matter, which can then have an institutional abuse happening, in addition to the domestic violence that the victim has already suffered. So the implementation is a lot of things to work around, especially at the level of the police, and I empathize with victim and witness support because I also the police that carries an holistic approach sometimes, especially if you're trying to get them to do something for the victim. Which brings to my last question to you, and I'll follow up, which is, if there is no office in Tobago, what is the support that exists for persons in Tobago? I know that Senior Superintendent actually is based in the Tobago Division, but outside of that, because she may be a friendly voice in the system, but outside of that, what support exists for persons in Tobago? That's it, thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to make a quick intervention because actually, so of course, thanks and congrats and everything. I wanted to raise the issue of the compulsory counseling because I know that used to exist in the past, and I know people said that the perpetrator would enter the counseling and say, well, I only here because if I do this counseling, I will whatever. So I think that we have to seriously work out what this compulsory counseling entails. Because of course, people who have mandatory counseling usually begin the counseling with resistance. In fact, some psychologists do not accept people who have asked for mandatory counseling. But I think there are excellent examples in different parts of the world about the way in which this is done, if it's done through group therapy, etc., etc. And I think that the counseling system has to have a strong gender analysis component, because I think there are issues of masculinity and femininity that go through this whole issue that cannot be dealt with without dealing with this. And in fact, I think that's a basic challenge of police training, that there's no gender training or gender analysis theory that's part of it, when, I mean, issues of gender are so ripe throughout the what police have to deal with. But certainly in this case, I think it's absolutely necessary. So I think that we need high quality systems for counseling, that people who do that only, that, you know, that, and that I was apparently in some jurisdictions, the case is not addressed until that counseling, extended counseling program is dealt with, the person participates, and there's general agreement that a change has taken place. So I just want to put in a serious plug for this proper high quality counseling arrangements.
Hi, morning everyone. Just two important questions. Like, I was looking at the recommendation 9, and it spoke about mandatory programs for the victims and the perpetrator. All well and good, but I keep seeing this post-intervention, these interventions happening. Could the act deal with preventative methods as well? Putting things in place to deal with before it happens? This isn't talk about it in the act nor in the recommendations. And secondly, Mr. Bransfield, you said that there is laws that protect our people. However, are there any, because we see it like, for example, in the Sexual Offences and Domestic Violence Act, that children go to hospitals and have babies and then nobody's being held accountable for it. Are there subsequent acts that should support this act, making it mandatory? For example, a monitoring and evaluation policy or act that would hold these persons accountable, right? And last question, how do you stay so young looking?
Good morning, everybody. All protocols observed. I am Anne-Marie Smith from the Office of the Prime Minister, one of the listeners on the line. And from my experience, an issue with jurisdiction with officers, I think that needs to be handled, because when our victim called the line and they tell you that, you know, my husband have friends in that station, and they would not take the report, right? We have to send them to another station. And when you reach to another station, they call back the line and they verbally abuse you to why you send them to that station, right? So this is an issue that needs to be dealt with. Sometimes police officers do not go to the response of the victim at all, because they will call. If you tell them, well, go to call the station, or go to the station, they'll say, well, we called them since 2 hours ago, right? And they are not responding. Sometimes we have to make the call, right, in order for the police officers to respond. So that is something that needs to be dealt with in this aspect of the act, right? Another thing, I see another issue is children, boys 12 years. Now, if a woman is leaving her home, she's leaving with everything. She's not going to separate from her children. And there's nothing in place for boys, 12 years and over, nothing. And this is something I think needs to be dealt with. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Valdine Shares Neptune, and I was a reporter. I'm still a journalist. This is Catalina. and I am a survivor of domestic violence, recent survivor. There are so many things said here today that sparked something in me, so many things that Ms. Seaburn-Sweet spoke about. The issue of no bail, I did attempt about a year and a half ago to write an article from an attorney who suggested this no bail. And the story was pushed aside because they felt that his name wasn't big enough. Because he said that there were certain criminal offenses that pushed, because of the prevalence of them, they pushed the laws to change that are meant to say no bail, like kidnappings and firearms at some point in time. And that domestic violence should be now seen as prevalent enough to warrant no bail. That's one. So I'm so happy to see that as a recommendation. Two, that issue that Ms. Smith just raised, I lived that. My son was 13 when I made my report. I stayed in the shelter for 6 weeks, and I had to separate from my entire family. My children, 4 of my children went to a home, and my son I had to find somewhere for him. The officers from the victim unit, it was victim unit at the time, it wasn't victim and witnesses. They said they could not find somewhere for all of us at the time, so we had to separate, and it traumatizes the children even more, having to be separated from me, because they would have gone through enough trauma as it is, having seen what they did see. I have since, I was doing some research a day and came up on something that happened in the United States. A young lady by the name of Amber was killed at the hands of her husband or boyfriend, and her mom lobbied for the Amber Alert. Inside of me, something was birthed, and I formed, it was just a Facebook page called the ABBA Movement. It's all for bracelet alerts. And I am now stepping out to lobby for and petition if I have to, if it's possible, the implementation, a mandatory implementation of a GPS tracking device, which would now monitor. I think it would benefit the registry, because now we'd be able to track offenders, and this doesn't have to apply only to abuse, is child sexual abuse, the elderly abuse, anybody that commits an offense. Because let me tell you something, that protection order which I've had, the benefit of having, is a piece of paper. I'm sorry to say it, but it is a piece of paper. Yesterday I went to an organization, and in speaking to the social worker there, she asked me, so if your husband gets bail, do they inform you? They don't. There's no networking between the prison, the police, the magistrates, nothing. So you are left at, let me tell you something, it's only when you hear, hey, he calls you, that's when you know he's out. When you see the blade or the gun or a lash coming, then you know he just got bail. And the protection order, when someone makes up their mind, just like in the victim's officer who said, the guy had made up his mind to slit her throat and kill himself. Also, I'm also looking at the rehabilitative part of this, making it mandatory along with the GPS bracelet. Because to me, it seems as if it would be more of a deterrent than a protective order. Having this device would be more of a deterrent for a person. And if we can get into the schools and a change in mindset of particularly boy children, and a lot of the children going through so much in the homes, that it's the culture is bred from in the house of what they take out into society. So we often breed abusers. And they in themselves, if you look at the history, they often were abused themselves. So I have a lot of people say, so why are you feeling sorry for your abuser? It's because I know of some of his history, and 2, it's because I know hurting people hurt. It's as simple as that. We need to rehabilitate people, not just put on a bracelet and say, because that's like a brand, you know. I'm for the bracelet because it empowers the abuse. It offers up a more sense of protection for me when there's an app on my phone that can tell me he's in your area. And then I know that networking can happen. You have a neighborhood watch. What I did for myself, I had to be my own network. What I did for myself is I joined my children in the police youth club. and I took my husband's picture to them and I made them take a picture of his ID card. So they would now know, even though we live in the same area, they have a sort of bulletin out. Because I felt like I had to do that. Even in terms of him being in the prison, I called the police, I called the magistrate, the prisons almost twice every week to find out did any application was placed for him. Was any application placed for him? And at one point in time, I had even thought about going to the JP's office and asked, please do not grant him bail. That's how desperate I had become. Aside from the only protection I personally feel I have is divine protection, because I have 5 protective orders, and to be honest, because my matter right now is not based on domestic violence. There's another part of this thing too that I think people need to be aware of in terms of the domestic violence hotline. Sometimes a matter doesn't, when a mother calls in based on domestic violence, it could be other aspects also to what is happening into the home, in terms of the children being abused or whatever. And then what happens is I've seen it takes precedence, the children being abused, and society seems to kind of set aside domestic violence in a kind of way. There's woman and man thing, even in the terms of the level of the policing. And Ms. Sweet said something that really, really took me back some years. She said that the act, it's an offense of assault if someone is hit. So when you walk into the police station and you're just being beat up and you're bruised up and they do not want, the minute you say it's your spouse, they refer you to a JP. They don't treat it as an offense of assault like a human, another stranger to another stranger. I remember once asking a doctor, because my abuser walked into the hospital with me to get 7 stitches for a head, but he walked in. And there were officers there who had come in with a prisoner, and he told me, he said, you could go ahead and report, but how long I go staying for? And when I spoke to the doctor and I asked him, so if I make a report, how long will the person, will they get bail? And he said, yes, it's a bailable offense. And I know this ABBA movement is not just for me, because there's so many women walking around with masks. So many women, you're sitting in maxi, in a taxi, and the bus with them, so in your workplace, that are silently suffering. And it needs to change. When you find out about their suffering, is when you see them on the front page of the papers, and you say, oh my God, I knew that woman. Marcia Handful was one of them. And that was my colleague. And I don't want to talk too much because I can go on and on, and the amount of different things I've seen that I can talk about from my own experience. But this is dear to me, and I really want legislation to think about the GPS tracking devices. Please.
Thank you so much for sharing. 2 questions we'll take, and then we will have a response.
Good day, everyone. Are you hearing me? Yes, okay. I'm from the Office of the Prime Minister Gender Affairs Division.
Yes.
It's on? Yes. I'm from the Office of the Prime Minister. My name is Marina Smith, Gender Affairs Division, and I want to say that we recognize the gap in terms of women having boys 12 years around that age, and the government is currently in the process of constructing, well, it's already constructed, safe homes where women who have boy children would be able to go. So I want to say that that is a gap that we have looked to address, and we also have resource centers for the male persons, and also a safe home for males also. So we are gradually kind of like trying to close in some of the gaps that have been addressed there. Thank you.
Hi, good day everyone. My name is Melissa Morrow, and we are from the TTPS Police Academy. I know I heard a lot of comments about the training of officers and so on, which everything that was discussed in this forum today, which was very informative, we would like to address in training, and we have been, and it's a continuous developmental process. And we would like to network with who we can from here to develop the training and sensitization for our officers. because the law is there, and in responding to domestic violence, officers must follow what is laid out in the law and their standard orders, departmental orders, and so on. But in addressing the legislation, all the points that were brought up today, I am in support of it, and I believe that not every officer will be aware of all the protocol, and that's where the academy comes in with the training, offering training to as much officers as possible, and incorporating the training, not just the law, but the networking, the psychological aspects, all of these things need to be covered in the training rather than just letting them know what's in the law, because as many people mentioned, if there's no follow-up to some of the cases, and an officer does not feel comfortable, because a lot of times, not that they really won't like to, is that they don't feel comfortable because they are concerned about the legal ramifications and actions. So they would more stick to what they know and what they have been cultured towards. So this is something that could be brought up in the training, that change in the culture, the mindset towards dealing with these cases of violence against gender, male and female. In terms of my question, under point number 1, where I agree with the idea of removing the perpetrator from the home, but I wanted to know if any steps were also taken in developing the systems to deal with the perpetrator when, or the alleged when he's removed, especially if it's a case where the assault was minimal, well considered minimal. If he's removed and if he's held at a station and so on, how long will he be held there, and then what will be his reaction, or his or her reaction when they are released? Would it be a case of spitefulness? Okay, I was taken out of my home that I probably own and I buy everything and this method. So now they may want to take it out on the person even more because of that. So and then if the law addresses that and they remove the perpetrator, the systems have to be set up before. So I want to know if any effort was made in developing these systems, because the homes that exist are orientated towards the victims and those who need protection, but they aren't really. If you remove a perpetrator, where does that person go? So they need to have systems in place and networks to deal with the perpetrators as well, not just the victims, because a victim may not want to leave because they are uncomfortable and they need the support of the home, they need the finances. So if you remove the breadwinner, who may be the perpetrator, then what is the victim left with in terms of finances for their children and so on? So all these things have to be considered in addressing removing the perpetrator from the home, although I am in agreement with that move.
Hi, good morning. Is this on? I just want to speak to the issue of what Stephanie Leach, the issue of the witnesses. So there are provisions in the law for things similar. So for example, in the Children's Act, they have what they call responsible adults that have to report sex that happens between minors. And for those of you who don't know what the law looks like, it typically starts with definition. So they define who constitutes responsible adults. And reporting doesn't only now happen at the police stations, but it also reports can also happen at the Children's Authority. And you see how there's been an effort to really harmonize the laws and the policies. And I'm glad to see people from OPM represented here. Because I think that what has happened around children's law can be a real example of best practice of how robust our government can act towards the protection of particular populations. And we need to encourage a replication of that kind of robustness around the protection of women.
Good morning, Karen Graves Affect. Just wanted a statement really. Thank you very much for this forum and agreeing with all the 10 points, but I wanted to just ensure that explicitly we speak to the spiritual side of things and religion, because, for example, I'm a Catholic, and of course, the doctrine in our faith is that you don't divorce your husband, yes? So that some of our women and or men might be struggling with how do I maintain my family yet stay true to my faith. And I think it's important for us to reach out to the faith-based organizations to extend the network for awareness to be all-pervasive in our society. Because that's an entire element. I'm not sure if I understood, but I don't know if it was spoken to in the recommendation. So just to be complete. Thanks.
We have one, and then yes, go ahead, and then.
Hi, good day, everyone. I'm Christine Greenwich. I've had the honor of being a social worker for the past how many years, and recommendation 1 really is dear to my heart. I am not, in terms of removing the perpetrator, we have had several conversations, my colleagues and I, and sometimes we say, you know what, we don't care, put them in the Hyatt, put them in the back of some police station, put them in a room, because we have seen it's a painful sight to see a child grabbing onto a chair leg, grabbing onto mommy, grabbing onto a blanket, because they don't want to go St. Mary's home or wherever. So I really hope that this recommendation sticks, and I trust and that the systems will be put in place, because it has to be done. It's one thing for an adult, for me, to move and mobilize, but how painful it is. My favorite toy, my favorite little bed, a bunk in the corner, a sheet on the ground, that's my space. And then you take me now, I'm accustomed with my one little enamel cup. Then I have to go in a home and share. I don't own anything there. I have no familiar faces. And then someone spoke about institutional abuse. Bam, things could happen. So at least I agree with all the recommendations, but to see one is very, very dear to my heart. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Respect to the panel, appreciate the presentations. 2 things I want to, my name is Terry Ince, I'm with the CEDAW Committee and the Network of NGOs. So the first thing I want to support all of the points. Number 6, I want to really highlight that, which is the network of support of persons who have a protection order. And that includes hopefully it's the community. Because I think in many instances, many if not most instances, we often hear anecdotally what they heard, what he said, but no one have ever thought to support that situation that is occurring. So I want to very strongly recommend and support that. I also didn't see but heard the need for the continuing education of the police officers as well as the victim and support unit. I thought the language that was being used was very interesting. I think we really need to be careful when we're doing this type of work to use the right language with our I don't want to say perpetrators or victims, but just use language, and it must be gender appropriate. And I think it's when you're in that opportunity, when you have that opportunity to help with that, we need to try to really do that. But I also heard that the police officers were extensively trained in 2014 or in 2017. And so I want to believe that this training is an ongoing process and it doesn't just happen one time. So if that is not the case, if it is just a one-time thing, then I think it's important to highlight that this should be an ongoing process. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I am Arlene Hamlin Hall, Trinity River Police Academy. I'm an educator at the academy, so I'm happy to have come just after my colleague. There has been training done extensively, but what I want to concede to you is exactly what my colleague would have mentioned, is that we need collaboration. These programs may have been put together by individuals who did not have the outlook that we all have in this room. And so at the present time, we're in the process of redoing programs at the academy. So it is an ongoing process. And so we implore you, those of you who have knowledge base in the area, to connect with us so that we can improve on the programs of the academy and ensure that our officers are well equipped. I believe one of the areas that we have neglected, and even in regular society outside the police service is gender sensitization. I'm also one of the directors of an organization, Anointed Sons International, and we work at the Youth Training Center with young men. And what we have realized over time is that they're very gender insensitive. So if we can start to do some work with NGOs, preparing them to speak within these forums, I believe we should be on the way, so we can approach it from the upper level and from that lower level, so they're gender sensitized. So as they grow, I believe it will have an impact on the occurrence of violence in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
We are still waiting, but we have 2 questions, and then we're going to have to wrap up with that. So let's hear from Jackie and then this lady.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Jackie Bridges, today representing Woodland Women and Millennium Sisters. I stepped out for a short while, so I don't know if the elephant in the room was discussed or addressed. But, so just in case I'm repeating, forgive me. I want to speak to number 3, amend the definition of cohabitant to include same-sex relationship. I'm hearing about that. The same dynamics in the heterosexual happens in that relationship too. So we have to deal with it somehow or the other.
Good day. All protocols observed. My name is Danielle Jones, attorney at law. I am an attorney that loves the magistrates court. I know some persons may not like that arena, but that's my arena. And domestic violence is very dear to me because I love interacting with victims of, unfortunately, domestic violence, but empowering them to get out. But the difficulty we're having is not only the training of the police officers, training of the judicial officers and the persons who work at the court. At the Police Magistrates Court, no issue. Go to Superior Magistrates Court, magistrate don't know anything about anything, any section in the act, and you have to reinvent the wheel. The other issue I'm having is that some of the definitions, like for instance, they have members of the household could apply. So they have member of the household is person living in the same house or unrelated by blood, marriage, or some other thing, can't remember right now. So it should be, in my opinion, or and not and. So you have to, in presently, we have to get the 2 in order for the person to bring the application, otherwise they would have to bring it under harassment or assault or something, some other definition. And with respect to recommendation 10, I am one for technology. I want to know the form that register would take. Because we are in 2017, we're writing things in a notebook. It should be electronic. It should be, I have an opportunity, well, unfortunate opportunity, they can locate a copy of the protection order at the station. Because I am a diligent attorney, I had a copy on file. So I had to carry my client, lost a copy, so I have to accompany her to the station for them to do something. So it should be scanned and uploaded so that this register, I would like them to, even if I register for attorneys who visit the station, if you don't have your ID, your client call you while you're at the mall, the police officers, some officers, if they remember you, treat you well. Other than that, who are you? And I'm nobody. I'm like at the bottom, right? So those things, we need to be up with the time. That's all.
On that note, we close the floor to comments and questions. We really and truly appreciate all of your feedback, your perspectives, your testimony, your evaluation, and your recommendations. So we will just turn to the panel to give just a brief overview of comments, and then.
All right, let me just say that every single thing that has been heard, that has been contributed, experiences on the ground, in particular the experiences of persons who have experienced domestic violence, experiences of the victim and support unit, experiences of the police academy, experiences of the ministry, experiences of the activists on the ground, experiences of the attorneys in the court like Adisha and the last speaker there. All of these, I want to say, all of these support and corroborate each other. and the fundamental sense that we at the EOC have had as to how to approach amending or tweaking or revising, revamping the domestic violence response. So it's all been taken down. It's not going to be, not going to have the time to comment on every single response. Suffice it to say that the 10 recommendations that we have put out on the flyer are just what we consider to be the 10 most important, and were by no means the complete set even in the EOC document. But of course, they have been added to and augmented brilliantly in this forum today, and all that has been said we will consider, we will massage together and come up with an even more comprehensive document. Now, what I think has clearly emerged from this forum is not so much the need for amendments and tweaking of the legislation, but the question of resources, the question of the design of protocols, the question of the overarching approach, the action plan to deal with this topic. Because when you hear the victim and support unit say that they have 17 officers, you heard that? Yes. 17 officers. To where in Trinidad and Tobago there are 10,000 applications for protection orders in Trinidad and Tobago. And where we appreciate that the police statistics grossly underreport the incidence of the criminal offenses, we see the scope and the magnitude of the problem that we have. So that there are many pockets in which there have been appropriate programs and models designed. It's the question of how do you apply them countrywide, how do you resource them, and how do you get everybody on the same page. And so I think that our work is cut out for us. And this would then be, rather than the culmination of a process, the beginning of a process of coming up with that overarching plan, or that overarching action plan, involving, yes, proposals for amendment to the act, but there's a lot of design work in terms of, for example, we already have the Partnership for Peace. It's in Trinidad as well. I mean, Peter Weller from Caribbean is able to administer and trade in that program. It's a question, he's one man, that's one organization. So what we see is an opportunity for a massive collaboration between all of the NGOs and the government agencies in a situation where there is a scarcity of resources, particularly at the moment. Partnerships are going to be so important. Partnerships between the NGO sector, the commercial sector, the international organizations sector, the organizations such as the EOC, the ministries. And rather than to say, well, it's the government that has to fund all of this, or is it who really is going to design all of the myriad of programs that have been spoken about and that have been seen and have been, the experience has been lived, that are necessary here today. So, I mean, I don't know that it is going to be useful or helpful for me to go into all of the different points or to acknowledge, I want to acknowledge the validity of, everything that has been said. Some very, very powerful contributions of persons who live the issue, and to just assure the forum, the organizers, the participants, that we are going to take everything on board and take it forward. So I don't think that, I would want to go any deeper. Collegiality, I mean, the magistrates need to be on the same page. All of the magistrates together with one another need to be on the same page. The relationship between the police, the magistrates, the NGOs, or the interagency protocols are myriad that would have to be designed.
I'd like to thank everyone for their contributions. When we had only recently over the last year begun to meet much more often, this is women's organizations, to talk about what to do
around issues of sexual violence and intimate partner violence and so on, there were a lot of ideas thrown out around the table, some of which seemed long-term and hard to pursue, some of which it was difficult to organize around, and there were a lot of very specific suggestions. You know, something as small as even when a woman wants to just have her partner be warned, that a report must be taken of that warning. You know, so we've gotten a lot of things as we continue as women's organizations and other organizations continue to mobilize. There can be some specifics to rally around. As Dr. Nixon said, there's going to be an MOU between the Sexual Culture Justice Project and the Equal Opportunities Commission, and I think this is a really excellent opportunity for us to continue this work in particular so that there can be what we hope would be results. I do want to say though that the history of trying to achieve things is that you really need sufficient advocacy, sufficient and widespread and targeted and strategic advocacy. And so it really has to be a collective process, not where there are some leaders, but where everyone is invested from wherever they are. Finally, I do want to remind you that the strategic plan to end gender-based and sexual violence has been before Cabinet since 2016. A national strategic plan has been, is that it? Mm-hmm. Right. I was going to say it is not available for public reading, right? It has been before Cabinet since 2016, and this is a problem, right? Because many of these recommendations will have been contained in this plan, and it is very difficult to move ahead in a coherent manner when a plan is already sitting there, needs approval, and needs funding. And so for me, that's the first point of us continuing to hold the state in particular accountable.
Thank you so much, everyone who's listening, taking notes, sharing their stories, sharing their perspectives. Mrs. Sibran, sweet Dr. Hussain, thank you so much for your feedback, and indeed, it is a collective effort. We are near the end of the program. We must say thanks first, but before that, I would like to invite you to sign a letter which is to be sent to the Attorney General, and Dr. Nixon would very quickly tell us about this letter so you know what you're signing.
Well, it's just an opportunity for us to support what we've discussed here, knowing that we want to actually invite all of us as organizations. Many of you represent a myriad of organizations, civil society groups, and other associations that you can create your own letters. So we want to call on action today. Please support the EOC's recommendations, and we've asked in the letter for the Attorney General to respond to the EOC and to the IGDS by December 10th as our 16 days of activism start today. So we want at least a response from the Attorney General and with some kind of commitment and support to at least get this on the legislative agenda. And so we call on you to sign those letters and take a few. We have a bunch of copies if you want to share it with your organizations. We'll also make it available online so you can download it. And if you want to sign it today, we will deliver these letters signed by you on Monday. And just a quick view of calendar of events. On Saturday the 25th, the IGDS has a Women Speak songwriting workshop with Ruth Osmond here at IGDS in our seminar room. And on Saturday the 25th, Working Women for Social Progress has a candlelight vigil from 6 to 10 p.m. in Tunapuna at the Millennium Sisters building. And on Sunday the 26th, the Rape Crisis Society and Coalition Against Domestic Violence also has a vigil at 5 p.m. Holy Name Convent Halls, walk around the Memorial Park in Port of Spain. And then there are a number of other activities. Please stay tuned on the IGDS has a Facebook page, the calendar of events for 16 days of activism. And then we'll be wrapping up our IGDS 16 days of activism on Monday, December 11th with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and Living Waters Community film screening and panel discussion. And then also we have our IGDS billboards on the gender-based violence and the Two Cents Movement collaboration. And oh yes, I'm sorry. Our big push, of course, is to share the messages. We have these 10 messages of the recommendations on social media already on our IGDS Facebook page and our Twitter and Instagram. So you can feel free to circulate and share them, start discussions in your organizations about perhaps other changes you'd like to see, but also pushing the 10 and supporting the EOC.
Thank you, Dr. Nixon. 10 recommendations, that is, for ending violence against women. With that, yes.
Please don't just take your letters home. Please sign them and allow us to post them. Or if you're taking them back to your organizations to photocopy, that's great. We don't want to see it slip into your notes from today. We are happy to send as many as possible from today, as well as look forward to any that you all send.
So sign and give that lady in the purple with the gray sweater. Yes. Thank you so much. As you sign, I would like to invite Ms. Leah Thompson to give thanks to all who made this possible.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Just very briefly, I would like to say thank you to all of you so very much for attending today's forum and participating in this very important and necessary conversation. The civil society organizations, government bodies, international agencies here today, thank you so much for your time. In particular, I'd like to thank the campus community for supporting this event, especially the Institute of International Relations for hosting us today, and Mr. John Maloney for the technical support we received today. Thank you to all the panelists, Mrs. Lynette Seabaran-Sweet, Chairman of the EOC, Mrs. Deborah Lee Riviers, and Mrs. Gemma Taylor-Alexander of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service Victim and Support Unit, Dr. Gabriel Hussain, lecturer and head of the Institute of Gender and Development Studies, along with Dr. Angelique Nixon, lecturer and project lead researcher on the Sexual Culture Justice Project. Thank you all for your tireless work to protect women. This event would not have taken place without you. We do appreciate it. Thank you also to the staff at the EOC, in particular, Mrs. Ria Mohammed Pollard, Manager of Corporate Communications, as well as Ms. Krista Daniel, Corporate Communications Officer, as well as the EOC Legal and IT team. Thank you for your logistic and technical support. Last but not least, I'd like to thank the staff of the IGDS. Thank you to Dr. Simone Barrett for your lovely chairwomanship today. Chairpersonship. Thank you to Ms. Catherine Chan for her technical support, Ms. Tricia Basvio, Ms. Tibia Collins, Mr. Marcus Ramkisoon, Ms. Renuka Ananjit, Adizi Greenwich, and Ms. Rachel Taylor. Thank you all for your help in putting this event together. Ms. Yolanda Simon has asked me to send a call out to all present regarding International Women's Day 2018. This is happening on the 10th of March 2018. IGDS, in collaboration with the Coalition of NGOs and Life in Leggings, are again planning a march opposite the Prime Minister's office. That's around the Savannah. This march will be happening across territories, and we hope to see you all there in 2018. Ms. Simon will be contacting you all shortly. Again, please don't forget to sign the letter. Thank you so much for coming today.
And with that, we may depart.